All right, so we're going to talk about Django and Django documentation. So you come out here, you click on documentation, it's going to take you out here to 4.2. You guys can always double check your documentation version at the bottom. As you can see, there's a 5.0 version, but that's going to be a preview release. Over here on the left is what we're going to move through. So Django has a really good tutorial. Follow the tutorial, walk your way through it. It's going to be a good foundation, just like we did with Flask. When I first started coding in Django, that's exactly what I did, and then modified that into the project I needed it to be. Guess what? That's what you guys get to do in class, right? And then there's some advanced tutorials. Over here on the left, as you scroll down, how this documentation is organized, you'll have topics and different layers. There is multiple layers when you work with Django, all right? So when we work with the quote model layer, which is the layer that deals with all of your database, your index, etc., that's called the model layer. You can come here and click on any one of these to get the documentation for that section. That will be super, super handy when you're trying to figure out what you're doing, all right? So always come back to the main documentation. In the view layer, you have the links to all of those. The templating layer, this is similar to the templates that we did in Flask. And the language and the things that you would want to use there. Forms, and then your overall development process. We don't need to do that. There's also a section for admin. So when we build our web application, there will be the main site, and then there's usually an admin backend to the whole thing. And you can actually use the Django built-in interface for that, which allows you to add things to the database without actually having to go through your stuff, which is kind of slick. If you guys remember before, we were having to create schemas for all that. You can actually dump that kind of stuff in on the admin side. It also gives you a backdoor to your entire web application. So if you need to go in and check for users, delete users, do all that, you can have the admin interface for that. The slick part about the admin interface is it's extremely customizable and it's automated. So you say, I want this to be included on the admin, boom, it pops up on the admin and gives you all the choices to add, remove, edit, delete, all of that. You don't have to code it. It's just there. It's really, really slick. Then there's a whole section on security. And of course, there's a lot of things you got to do when you're building a web app to make sure it's secure. So they have options of avoiding things like clickjacking, cross-site forgery, cookies. Those of you that are in cyber know exactly what I'm talking about. This is the stuff we use to hack your website, right? Django has things built in to prevent that. You just have to implement it on the back end, which is usually do you want to use this? Run true. Yes. it's to some degree, it's that simple. All right. Internationalization and localization. This can make sure that you're writing the back end and your web front end is geared towards where you're located. So things like time zones. If you're pulling in information and you're displaying it to the user, you can let them set their time zone and it will automatically change all of the date created stuff to their time zone. So it automatically updates time so you're not hard coding everything in between there. The last of this, performance, that's just to make sure everything runs coder. Geographic framework, this is if you're going to use kind of maps. It allows you to do any kind of GIS web applications. If you remember in Flask, we had that ability, or in Streamlit, where we dumped in a map and then did a bunch of stuff over it. Same concept. Outside of that, other things that you may use for web applications, maybe to send emails, pagination, serialization. Serialization is when you do a search in your database and it comes back with like 14 pages, or it comes back with a bunch and you want to paginate it. That's all serialization, pagination, that kind of stuff. If you want to set up RSS feeds out of your web app, whatever you want to do. So other functionality, it can go really, really deep in the weeds with all the things you can do with Django. Focus on the tutorial, do the bare minimum. Then when you get into your project, you just add the features you need for your project. All right. Let's see here. So we're scroll back up and we're going to start part 1 of the tutorial. All right. This is going to be very similar, where if you remember, we had a blog app for Flask. We are going to create a polls app for Django. So the whole idea is that we have a public site that lets people view the polls and vote in those polls. And then we have an admin site that allows us to add, change, and delete the polls themselves. Okay. From there, we'll go ahead and run Django. So we'll follow this tutorial here. It's written for 4.2. That's what we want to use on our side for Django inside PyCharm. So let's go ahead and fire up PyCharm. and then we'll talk about the overall structure of a Django project. While I'm doing this recording, and I want to show you that, if you guys remember, I gave you a link to a Udemy course on Flask. If you weren't understanding Flask well enough, I can get you a Udemy link for Django, and I highly, highly recommend it. If you're going to be using Django in your final project, pay the $12 so that you can access this for the rest of your life. It's a lifetime access. If you've never used Udemy before, when you guys buy courses, they're lifetime.
Oh.
So they're totally worth the $12 when you want a topic that you want to refer back to. I'll get you that link here. Once we get done, I'll throw it in this section up in here. Okay, back to where I was. So let's get PyCharm loaded up here and close. And we're going to kill this project, which is probably one of the student projects. Okay. Now, normally we go out to GitHub, we create a new project, and then we bring that in on this side. These are one of those because there's so many moving parts. You'll create the new project on PyCharm, and we'll push that out to your GitHub for the first instance. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So we'll go up here, we'll go to new project. And we can click on Django on the left here. The beauty of using Django is you get all the built-in features within PyCharm Professional. So if you notice when you looked at PyCharm, there was multiple different levels of that IDE. There was the community open source free version. There was an education version. Then there was the full-on professional version that costs a lot of money, but you guys get it for free, right? That full-on professional version allows you to interact with everything you see on the left. So not just Python, but also Flask, Django, Scientific, Bootstrap, all that stuff. You guys can do that inside this IDE, all right? With Django built in, that makes it a whole lot easier for you. So over here on the right-hand side, we're going to set up a project. We want to change this name. Let's just call it Django tutorial, and then your initials for now, right? Oh, initials. And I will put this on the Blackboard. If you guys would do your first name or first initial, last name.
Okay.
So instead of JZ, yeah, is that what you guys are all laughing about? JZ?
No,
Oh.
no. You typed in the Django name and when he was like Django and changed and whispered it really quiet.
I got it. So Django tutorial and then use Zeller. So it turns out, I thought never happens. Of course, I only had 5 students. I have multiple of you guys having the same initials. Right. So like I have an AS Adam Stanborg. I also have an AS for somebody else. And then I have another one that's a BS and a BS for somebody else. I'm just going to change the instructions to first letter, last name.
Yeah.
Okay.
They never run by before addresses either.
Yeah.
Well, there's a funny piece.
Okay. So if we come down here, under more settings, you have the option for template language of Django or Jenga, right? We want Django. We'll leave everything else the same. You can go ahead and click this checkbox for enable Django admin. All right. And we'll talk about what all that means when we get that far. So now we'll hit create. And we're going to find out what version this pulls. I'm hoping it's 4.2. If not, we'll fix it.
As one does. It looks like it's 4.2.
Good.
Just by the install file showed up.
Should be able to click on Python packages and see what's in there.
Well, mine's still on the same step here.
No, okay.
Guessing starting a new Django project takes a while to build because it's got so much.
A lot of packages installed by default. Yep. Again, the beauty of using PyCharm on this versus something like Visual Studio is you would have to run all the individual commands at the command prompt to start this whole process of building out Django. So that's what it's talking about over here is you would have to run, Django, make sure it's installed. Then you're going to have to create start project and this whole thing. You guys will not need to do this inside PyCharm. It will have already created us a project. So here it says start project my site, whatever I called it at the top. In my case, it was Django tutorial J Zeller. That is the name of my overall project. So the way Django sets everything up, you start with a Django project. All right. A Django project is a collection of all your settings for Django and includes the database configuration, any Django specific options, and any application specific settings. All right. After you got your project set up, then you create an application. So if you guys remember in Flask, we had one called Flask R, right? You guys would create an application and those are all individualized apps. So normally a full-fledged web application may have 5 applications inside of it, but the overall project is whatever, right? The idea behind the applications is they're reusable. In other words, they should not be specific necessarily to your project. They could be reusable in somebody else's project, which means you can also bring somebody else's app into your project, which some of you may do, like a registration project that handles full-on registration, so you guys don't have to handle the registration. For example, there's one called Django registration. I highly recommend it. It's awesome, right? So you don't have to hand code it. You just use somebody else's project in yours as an app. You can install that app and you keep running with it. And you may use another app that's handled file documentation. So you guys don't have to write the code to handle file documentation and build a little mini FTP. Add that app into your project and away you run. So
someone else has done all the hard work. That's all.
Yep. Yep.
That's all I need to hear.
All right. So when you get a Django project, you will get something like this. And this is your tree over here on the left. So we have a Django tutorial project folder. That's this one here, right? We see these initial files that come in. This init just creates the initial file for here. There's nothing in this folder, and we don't use this one. It's a Python thing that allows you to run the folder as a executable there. All right. ASGI, we won't use or change anything in here. This is for us to run this in production. We would come back and modify that later. Settings file we will play with. This is where we can turn on certain things like the apps that we're using, middleware, which is our security, malware protection, things that we're building into our web app. We have allowed hosts, which tells us which hosts we want to run. Notice it automatically generated me a secret key. We will automatically have it generate one in the future when we go to production. So for you guys that are grad students and actually have to put your stuff into production, there'll be some cool things that we'll modify in settings to make it dynamic for that.
Do we need to put that secret key like in a get ignore file?
Yes.
Like, are we treating it like it's a private API?
Yeah, you would at this point. Right now, it doesn't matter. It's only when it gets to production stage. So, AKA you're running this on a live website. You have a section here for the backend on the database. You have a whole section for password validation. This is going to make sure that you're giving valid passwords. All of that kind of stuff is baked into Django. You don't have to code. Is this 8 characters? Is it a valid password? That kind of stuff's baked right in. You don't have to do it. So that's the reason you may use Django over Flask. Flask is bare skeleton, give you what you need. If you remember right, it had a password functionality, right? You gave it a password, it created a hash. This one generates a much more secure hash kind of thing. Internationalization, static, and all that. We'll talk about it. URLs is a page that we'll deal with here in a little bit. This is where you set up all of your URLs for your views. Again, URLs, think whack admin, right? Remember how we set them up in Flask and we had our routes? That's called views and URLs in Django. As we look down here on the left, you have what's called a manage.py. This manage.py is something we will use. We won't necessarily edit this code here. We will use manage.py on the command line. That's how you build things in your app, and we'll talk about that. Okay. So all that is just a preview to tell you how this is all formatted. Okay. Templates folder, that's where your HTML stuff is. All right. So let's go back to our tutorial. They want you to run at a command line, Django admin, start project, my site. We already did that when we told PyCharm to create that site for us. That makes sense? In the background, it ran that command for us. So this tells you your directory structure. Again, this is going to tell you what those are. Same things I just explained, but you can go in deeper inside of here. So when we want to run this server, we come out here to our terminal, right? And we would run Python manage.py, and you would say run server. All right, we hit enter. And it's going to automatically launch the server for us using the settings. And it's available at this IP address, which we go to and we get the basic Django website. It just says it's installed. All right. Because debug true is on, we actually see this. When you turn off that, then you would not see it. Notice that we run on port 8000. So does anybody remember what Flask runs on by default? 5000, right? Django runs on 8000 by default. Hint, hint, wink, wink might be a midterm exam question. Okay, That is how you can run that from the command line in Django. You can Control C to stop it. You can also come up here and hit play. It's going to do the same thing. Notice how it runs it on port 8000 by default. So whether you run it in terminal, remember how we did that in Flask, or you hit play up here at the top, it's going to run the same thing. If you want to tweak your settings and stuff and don't want to use it at the command line, which I encourage you to use this play at the top, you could always come in here and edit your configuration and adjust those settings. So if I hit run browser here, for example, and hit apply and okay, now when I run this, it's automatically going to pop up a browser for me at that page. It's kind of handy, saves you a step. You don't have to do it. All right. Other settings that might be interesting in this, you could tell it you're running a test server, which allows you to kill some extra reload commands, things like that. Environment variables that you may need to set, et cetera, et cetera. So we can hit apply, hit okay. And because this is a test server now, anytime I change code over here, it's automatically going to reload our server. We don't have to stop, restart. It does it on the fly. Cool. Got to get the basics before we run. Okay. Notice when I started this, I ended up with a database over here, right? And at this point, there's really nothing in that database file. It's just an empty database file. Okay. Let's go back to our tutorial. So we now have this up and running. We know what IP address to go to. Notice that if it's a 127.0.0.1, where can we access that from? What is 127.0.0.1? The loopback. We can only access it from our machine, right? If you wanted to be able to access this from a different thing, you could set that to run on quad zeros :8000, and it will then listen on every IP address on your laptop. So if in this case, if you're on campus, you would be getting either a private IP, or if you're hardwired in, you have a public IP, you're running a full-on website at that site. Or if you're in your dorm room or something like that here on campus, you're going to get a public IP, you're up and running off the races. You could tell anybody to hit that IP and go. All right. If you want to change the port number, you simply add it to the end of this, or if you were to go into your settings here, for example, edit current configuration, instead of 8000 here, we would tell it we wanted 8080. So if you were running multiple projects at the same time, you obviously can't run them all on 8000. So you may want to change that port number. Right? That does not affect how you send it up to me on GitHub, right? These are all just local settings that you guys would need to adjust. Okay, we handled that. We talked about the automatic reloading of run server. When you change any Python code, the moment you hit Control S, it immediately reloads the server and starts off again. Okay. Some things like adding files does not necessarily trigger a restart, so you may have to restart it. So if you edit a file, yes. If you just add a bunch of files like pictures, it won't necessarily restart the server for that. All right. So we want to create a polls app. So we have an environment that is our project, right? We got all of our settings, we got all of our WYSIWYG, all that kind of stuff. We need to write an application. And in Django, when you write an application, it consists of a Python package that follows a certain convention. Django comes with a utility that automatically generates the basic structure of an app. And so you just focus on the code rather than creating the right directories and all that stuff like we had to do in Flask, right? We just say start app, it spits out a directory structure for us and we're good. So for us, we need to create an app called polls. So if we come out here into our command line, and we want to stop our server, by the way, up here at the top if we're running it, we would say Python manage.py. And you guys will want to kind of, it's handy, at least I found this for me when I first started working in Django, create yourself a text file that has all these commands in it. Because there's some of these commands you're going to have to run over and over and over, write them down, store them somewhere so you have a cheat sheet as to what you need to write. Okay, it helped me. I still encourage you to do that. So the first thing we need to do is run this one, which is start app polls. Okay, so we go back to our code and we run start app polls, start app polls. That is going to create our directory structure up here for polls. And if we click on this, we now have an app called polls. Notice how it automatically created the migrations folder for us. the admin page, the apps, the models, the test, all those files automatically get generated. Okay. So what did that generate? With these different structures here, this admin file is dealing with your admin page for your project. Apps is going to be listing all the apps that you're using in the project. Migrations, when you make changes in your database, that's going to be called a migration. If you remember in Flask, we had to rewrite the whole database, wipe the database if we wanted to make a change, recreate the database, right? In Django, it does that in stair steps. So as you change this, it's a living project. If you need to add more to the database, add it to the database. When I start it from my side, it automatically creates all those iterations for us. So instead of one schema file that has to be the all end all, it has a bunch of little iterations as you grew your project. But by the time I deploy it, all those iterations are there and you're good to go. So it allows you to fly writing web applications. That's the whole point. Models, this is where we create that database schema, aka what are the models that we want to work with. We have a test page, which is similar to the test we talked about in Flask, and views is where we create our pages. This is where we say whack admin or whack register, that kind of stuff. All right. So the first thing we want to do is create a views page. We're going to come out to our views.py. So if we go to our polls, we go to our views.py. This is where we create all of our shortcuts. Now we're automatically going to get some imports here at the top. Sometimes we'll need to add some more imports as we go. We'll talk about them. So in this one, we need to add HTTP response. This is basically going to create us a web page on the fly with us just giving it some text, right? We don't have to build a whole HTML template, the whole 9 yards. This function generates that for us. So we go in here, we copy and paste this in. And then once we actually start our views, we want to just have one function that responds to our index and it says, hello world, you're at the polls, right? Very simple. Return this HTTP response. If you get these squiggly lines inside PyCharm, that's because it's expecting 2 empty lines before a function. All right, just so you know, if you're getting that and it's driving you nuts, give yourself 2 empty lines.
But PyCharm does it. It's pretty sometimes heavy-handed on the.
It is, well, it's following PEP 8 compliance, right? So it's trying to make sure you're generating code that won't break GitHub. Okay, so simplest view of that, we now have our polls. We can see all of that. We also want to look at our URLs. This is where we say what we just created as a view, right? We called that function index. We need to make sure we generate that as a place to go on our website. So we got to generate the URL for it. So we'll copy this code for URL. We go look at our URLs file. Notice there is no URLs inside of our app, right? If we look at this here, we need to create a URLs inside the app. So we come in here, right click on polls, new Python file, URLs, hit enter, and then we copy and paste this in. All right, so what this is doing is saying from all of our views, import the content that we need, like index. So this ties back to our views, aka we need to know what website we're generating, right? This is the function to generate the code for the website. This is the code that says if you go to whack index, or in this case, nothing, right? This is the page it's going to get. It's all broken into little compartmentalized chunks. Okay. This here where we have views.index, that's obviously referring back to this views file, aka index. Everybody get how that works? You guys have done a little bit now of OOP. This is our views file, views.index pulls the index function. That's what that's doing. We give it a name, index, that ties back so that if we ever say go to the index, it works. Okay. All right, so now we have that. The next step is we need to go back to our polls.urls and we need to add in this whole site over to our overarching project. So if you remember, our overarching project had a URLs file. Let's go to that, which is up here in this Django tutorial one. We go to that URLs and we have these patterns. We need to import this down here. So we go here. Let's add it in. If I hit enter, notice I have admin and site URLs, so we can actually trash this one. And that's got rid of everything for us. All right. So now we have, if we go to whack polls, then it's going to go to our polls URLs, grab all those. You remember in Flaskar, we had a auth section and we had a register section. That is this same concept. All right. This include just means you're going to include that URLs file for that separate app. In this case, we are including the polls app. This one here is our admin page that we talked about before. All right. You should always use the include when you're pulling in other URL patterns, except for admin site URLs. That's the only one that's an exception. Cool. All right. So now that we got that wired in, we can go ahead and rerun our server. And because I have it set up to pull up, what did I screw up here? Creating test database for alias default, no database fixture. Please provide the path for at least one fixture in the command line. I probably broke some. Give me a chance here. Let me undo the test server check. I bet that's it. Yep, that was it. Okay. Now when we launch a site, notice that we're not getting that Django splash page, but notice there is nothing at just the main website, right? We need to go to /polls and hit enter. Now we're at our polls index page that we just created. All right. Notice they gave us, there's two options right now. There's whack polls and whack admin. If I go to whack admin, I actually get the admin login screen, which we have not configured yet. But that's automatically built into Django when you do that. All right. So whack polls works and not the 8,000. All right. So let's go here. When we talk about our path and those, this is talking about query 3. That don't worry about that. You guys can come back here. Okay. We are now to part 2. All right. Now we got to set up our database, right? We got a website, that's great and all, but we got to figure out how to build a database. So this will be modified in our settings. Django works with multiple different kinds of databases, all right? What's nice about the whole structure is it's called a, we get the actual term here. So I can make sure I'm not telling you the wrong term. I know it's MVC, but I need to go through there. Stand by. They're probably doing photos. Oh, come on. Okay. So real quick, Django itself uses what's called an MVC pattern. All right. Those terms are model, view, controller. All right. Model, view, controller. What this means is this model, again, is our database. Our view is our page of how we display it. This controller is the glue between the two. Now, the benefit of doing this with something like Django is I can start out writing my entire code with something like SQLite. If I want to fork out and put in a Postgres server, I just changed my backend connector. It automatically does the magic for me. So the idea is if you have to do major backend overhaul, you do not have to change your entire code. You just say, nope, now I'm using Postgres. Well, okay. I will use the code for Postgres when I go to generate the database as opposed to SQLite. And I can change this on the fly. I can just say, nope, today I'm using SQLite, this I'm using over here. Which means you don't have to forklift out all your code. That's the whole point of this thing. So the benefit is you are going to write this in non-SQL format, right? You're going to write this model out. You don't have to build this nasty schema like you did in Flask. Flask, you kind of had to know SQL, right? You guys remember when we built that scheme out and you guys in your projects that you're trying to work on now are going, yeah, I don't know how to add this in the database because I don't know SQL. Yeah, right? So the goal behind Django is that you don't need to write it in SQL fashion. You write it in model fashion, and that will generically create that on whether it's SQL, NoSQL, MongoDB, all these other database languages, it generates it in that language. Once again, you got to walk before you run. That's why I told you that one. All right. So we're going to start again with our models, which I thought I had up. I just cleared it. Let me close these. Got too much stuff up here. Okay. We need to set up our backend database. So let's go out to our settings file. And if we scroll up or down, depending on where you're at, you have this database section. And right now we have this set up to use the engine for SQLite 3. And we're going to, in our main database or main base directory, we want to use this db.sqlite 3 file, right? That's what got created here. Now, for your guys' projects, leave this alone, right? We're just going to use SQLite 3, you're fine. If you go into production and you're building a big database and you want to connect it to Postgre and you guys want to pay for a bigger database or a faster database, we'll worry about that when you do that on your final project. But for your mini project 4 and probably everybody's project here, use a SQLite database. The big thing is you're going to add that to your gitignore. You should not be uploading the entire database on GitHub, right? I should be checking out your code, creating a new database from scratch with all your stuff in there. Because if you put a bunch of test data in there, I shouldn't see that when I check out your code from GitHub, right? I should get a nice clean database ready to roll. Okay. So that is where you find that is in your database. You know, again, in things other than SQLite, you have something like create database, blah, blah, blah. All of that's automatically done for you inside of there. If we look in our installed app section, this again is where you have the admin. You're going to use that site shortly. The auth is an authentication system. This allows you to automatically write that. Notice how we had to hand code that in Flask, all built into Django in there. Content types, a session framework, a messaging framework, and static files. So sessions is, remember how we wrote that session cookie? It's built into Django. You don't have to write that code from scratch. A messaging one is if something goes wrong in the database, you can then send that error to the end view so that it pops up on the screen and says there was an error doing this, right? So it's a messaging system on the back end of your web app. You don't have to hand code it. Remember how we were trying to do that and it was miserable? It's built into Django. Everybody understanding why you're going to use Django for the final project now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Last
Yeah, we did. And that's the reason I teach it in that fashion. Because there's sometimes where you don't need all that overhead, right? If it's a very basic web app, you may not need all that overhead, and therefore you can run it lean and mean as a Flask web app. So it's a time and place. Okay, if we want to create our tables inside of that, we have to run this command, python manage.py migrate. This is one of those you add to your notepad file that I talked about earlier. You are going to have to run migrate a lot. Anytime you make a change in your backend, you have to rerun migrate. Okay. Anytime you add new applications into your program, you have to run migrate so that it adds all those things into the database. Okay. So we need to create a model. And if you think about it, this is how we create the SQL database and how we're going to store stuff in our SQL database. And I'm telling you right now, if you know Python, you can create this stuff, right? You don't have to know database SQL schemas. You do know Python, hopefully, at least well enough to write a class and a model, right? All right, so we're going to create this text. Let's copy and paste this into our models.py. So we come in here, we go under polls, down to models, and we're going to copy and paste all this in here. All right. Now, if we look at this, we have a class. Think of class as a entry in our database, right? This is the name of our table. So I want a question table. And in that question table, I want two columns. I want the question text and I want the publication date. All right. Notice on this one, I set this models.char field. So my question text is going to be a character field. And I want to have the max length to 200. Remember this in Flask? You were asking, how do we set the max limit? Because somebody could just dump in the sonnet from William Shakespeare and it would overload our system, right? Now you can set those max limits on that kind of thing in something that you can read, right? It's max limit 200. And you can set this on any character field that you want. I can change that to 255. I could change that to whatever I want it. Pub date, we can say that this is our quote date published. It uses a date time field, which will automatically timestamp every time we created it. If you remember the blog post, it was very similar to what we did there. In our choice table, this is where we can choose things. So we have a question. This is a foreign key back to our question table. So we generate our question and we have the date that that was published, right? Now on our choice, AKA we want to pick one, it goes back to that table and only gives us the options that are already in the table. That's what a foreign key benefit is. It depends on the other table. You don't rewrite things. You just point it back to the other table. All right, we have that. The section here on delete cascade. This just means if we delete this choice, delete the question that's associated with this choice. It's pretty simple. Choice text, again, back to a char field, and votes. This is an integer field that starts at 0. Default equals 0. So when we increase our vote, we up that by 1 in the database, right? Pretty simple code. Everybody understand how models work over that horrible, ugly database schema, right? This is really, really simple in here. The key is that you get to learn these char fields, date time fields, foreign keys, char field, integer field. There is very specialized ones in Django that handle everything for you. So by using an integer field and we start at 0, it makes sure that it is a valid integer when you type in input, right? We don't have to code out whether or not this is a valid thing. If I use a IP address, just like what you were talking about here in the old Python class, it has all the checks and balances to make sure you're actually giving it an IP address. You don't have to code that. It checks it. And if it doesn't work, it says, nope, database error. Oh, okay. Tell them to re-put it back in. So all of these have lots and lots of checks and balances coded out for you. If you look at this inside this code and you go out here to DB models and we right click and open this tab, this takes you back to the model instance, right? And this comes back from that first page when I said, here's the section on models. This tells you every single type that you could possibly use inside of here. So as I scroll down, you're going to see everything on those and which ones are available. I won't go through all that now, but you can see that. So on our field classes, if I open that up in a new tab, these are all the different classes that you can use. We'll scroll past here till we get to the actual ones. Blah, 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 blah. Field, hidden, auto create, one-to-one, many. That's not what I wanted. Showing all the, there we go. So we could set things as blank. We could have a choices field. Choices allows us to specifically say these are all our only options for that choice, right? For example, we have freshman equals FR, sophomore SO, junior, etc. Year in school choices, freshman equals freshman. And then down here, when we have our model, we can specifically say it's only one of these options. It's kind of a cool way of doing choices. Let's see, what else is important here? Scroll down. DB column, index, table space. I went too far. We're going to keep going down here. There we go. Field types. So these are all the different field types you can use in your models. An auto field pretty much just tries to automatically increment. Think of it as a primary key that we used in the other one. You don't have to create that. Django automatically creates a primary key field with a primary ID, right? Big auto field, big integer field. So big integer field is a 64-bit integer. That is a number that looks like this. So it ranges from that to that. If you're not using that big of a field, you use just an integer field, which is a 32-bit one, right? Binary field, this is as simple as true or false, right? Boolean, again, true, false, or null, one or the other. Char field, that's the one you guys saw, has the options of max length, and then you can set that. If you want to use large amounts of text, you would use a text field. The difference here is when I type and use this on my website, right? If I have it fill in a character field, it gives me a single line. If I tell it a text field, it automatically creates the text widget that has the giant box and all the text you can type in. So if you set these to the right field in your HTML, it automatically pulls the right one that you should be using for that. Again, you don't have to hand code everything. It's really, really cool. It's so much time trying to code a front end, right? Date field, this will automatically get the date time for now. Decimal field checks to make sure that you give it decimals. You can also set it to max digits. So if I said max digits is 2, right, and my decimal places is 2, I can now have a currency field, right? If I set, I'm trying to store a money amount for something, I set decimal places to 2, I can set my max digits to whatever. If I say 2, then the max is $99.99. All right. Lots of other ones here. Email field, same way. It automatically is like a char field, only it makes sure that it has validation for an email. You don't have to figure out if this is a valid email address. It does the check for you. The moment you try to add it to the database, it checks it. If it doesn't work, it kicks it out. File field, it stores a file there for you, basically converting it into binary. What else we got? I don't need to go through all these, but I want to give you a rough idea of ones you might use. Generic IP address field. This stores a generic IP address in text form and validates it. All right. Image field, you guys may need to do that if you want people to upload images. Integer, JSON, positive integer. This makes sure that you're only grabbing positive integers, 0 or higher.
On the file one, is there a limit to the size of file that you can
Yeah.
on there?
Yep. And you may not necessarily, what that will sometimes do is store just the field path for that, meaning that you know it's in WAC static, WAC images, WAC PNG, something.png. This stores that field and that's all it's storing. It's not actually uploading the file in the database. It's just storing the path to the said file. The benefit is it will automatically create your file path for you, which you guys have dealt with a little bit in Python. You got to have os.path, join this, join that to get the right path. It builds it all for you. Where was I at here? Last couple ones. Slug field is just something that's real small associated with it. Text field, time field, and foreign keys. Okay. So I know that seems like a lot, but I'm trying to cover just these two topics today. We need to get back to our field. So we created, the only ones we used were char field, date, time. We used a foreign key. Notice on foreign key, you pass it the module that you want to connect to, AKA this question is going back to the question module, and on delete cascade. That's pretty much given. You do that on everything. All right. Char field, integer field. All right. Now, to activate this, we need to add our polls app to our settings file so that it's automatically added in here. All right. So notice how our polls app config goes at the top. We don't add it to the bottom. We add it to the top because it goes in order. So we're going to Control C this little section, go out to our settings file, scroll to our installed apps, this section here, and add it at the top.
And that's in which settings?
In settings, which is your overall project.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's it.
And then you just go polls, apps, polls config. Okay. Now that that's in there, we can now go and run make migration polls. This is something you guys will need to do on everything. So the moment you make a change in the database, you have to do what's called a make migration. All right. So we do a Python manage.py make migrations. And then you can either specify the individual app or the whole thing. In this case, we're going to specify the app of polls. Hit enter. And what that does is it goes through your models database and determines if you made any changes. If you did make changes, or this is the first time it did it, it builds that now into our database. So if we go out and look at our SQLite database, we actually have stuff, and you can go out to our database and connect it. If I connect it here, give me a second. SQLite, where's SQLite? There we go. And that's complicated. Right click. Why did that not open it? All right, fine. Ignore that. We won't do that right now. We'll need that later when we're actually testing. So we notice in the output that it made a migrations file. It created this model and a model. Notice it made this initial .py file. If we go back and look in our folder, we go to this migrations, it created this file here. If we look at that file, look what's inside of there. You have operations, create module, blah, blah, blah. This is the code that builds out the SQL schema for you so that you guys don't have to do it by hand. All right, you'll never edit this or change it. It's there by default. Okay, we're almost there to the first start of this whole thing. All right, so now if we wanted to do a SQL migrate, this we don't need to run. So this one you need to save in your little book of notes. This one you do not. This just makes you build out a SQL schema file if we wanted to do it, which in our case, we don't need to, all right? If you noticed, it would look something like this. Create table, name of the table, ID, not null primary, blah, blah, blah. This is what you would get out if you ran that SQLite command. Notice this is Flask. When you guys built out your tables and all that in Flask, Exact same code that you see on the screen here. We didn't have to write that. All we had to do was write question, char field, max 200, write it for me. And it does it. Okay. Last but not least, after you run those make migrations, you have to actually migrate them, aka implement them. So come down here and you run migrate. This is another one you want to add to your little book of characters, right? So when I ran migrate, notice that it did a lot more than just the one I created. It also created all the admin, all the auth tables, all the polls, and sessions. These are all built into the database now. Okay, I ran my make migrations. I come out here. So you'll notice this is what you always do. You change your models, you run make migrations, then you run migrate after that. Save those commands because you will run them over and over and over as you make changes in your project. All right, last but not least, if you want to interact with your Python project or your Django project and test for things, you may run something called Python managed shell. That gives you a shell within your project, and this allows you to interact with the database directly. All right, so if you're troubleshooting things like that, you can use the shell. If you need to test on pulling the right code, test it in a shell. All right, we're not going to cover that necessarily today. All right. Last but not least, if we go back and look at our model section and we try to pull something back, we're going to get something like this, where we get question object 1 and nothing. It's just an object, right? You guys played with object oriented. If you pull and say type and it says object, okay, what is in the object? What traits do I have? What can I do with it? So what you can do is come back to your model and say def underscore str self. This means return this string every time you call for it. If I call for this overall model, just return this as my text so you know what the hell is coming back out of it, or your choice. I just said that on a live recording. Oh well. So we come back here and we copy out this little function under question. And let's go to our models. And we're going to put that under here. So what does this say? This means that if I call a question model, just return the question.text as whatever that was. Right? Then you know, because it's a question. If we're returning the actual text of the question, makes it a whole lot more useful to us. Same way with our polls. We want to tell it to return the choice text. So let's go here, choice, and our choice text. All right. And to make PyCharm happy, we have to press enter afterwards. Okay. So again, it's important to add these string methods underneath your models. It adds your own convenience when dealing with an interactive prompt. But as you're automatically generating these in the Django admin, it will say, oh, that's what you want us to return for that? Sure, here it is. So in Django admin, you're building structure across your entire app by just simply saying, return this for me when I call that module. Saves you a lot of code. All right, last but not least, we can have a custom method, which is down here under question. So this one here, let's copy and paste this in and talk about it a little bit. And that was under which one? It was under question. Okay. So what question does is check if we have a filter now for was published recently. And if it was, return the publication date now minus time delta. AKA if it was published in the last 24 hours, we use it. So this is an automatic function that will automatically pull the things in the last 24 hours. So it looks for all these date times. If it matches within the time now minus 1 day, return that result. And then all we have to do is say was published recently as a filter. So over here, if you look at this interactive, we could say pub date, and you can filter that out by published recently. All right. I know it's super dense, guys. When you start playing with it and using it, it will make a whole lot more sense. Build out your template. Last thing we're going to do is set up our Django admin. So right now, if you remember on our Django admin, we go out to the website. If I could type in a number, 127.0.0.1, and we are in an 8,000 whack admin. We get a login. Well, that's great, but we never created a user for us to log in with, right? So we need to create that. If we go to our terminal and we use Python manage.py, create super user. All right, we hit enter. This is creating the overall admin that we want to create, logging in. So I can use my username of JL Zeller, or I could create administrator. I wouldn't use administrator, right? Never create admin's account with the name root, admin, administrator. That's bad. Bad juju. Don't do that. All right. So we're going to go ahead and use JL Zeller. Email address, we can set it to whatever. So jlzeller@fhsu.edu. Password. This is where we can set our password. So I love Python. Hey, I love Python. Okay. Notice when I created this, because it's the super user account, there was no password validation there, meaning it didn't have to have 8 characters, special characters, blah, 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 blah. When you create super user, you can do whatever you want. From there on out, when we create users on this system, it's going to start hitting all those password authenticators to validate that. So now that I created that, I can go out here and log into my website. So we have our website. And if you notice, when I created that super user and I go to my Python console, that we're all good. Oh, I'm sorry, here to the run. There we go. It restarted itself. We're good. Come out, log in with our username that we just created. I love Python. And we now have the backend Django admin. All right. So this is a website that's automatically built out to view the whole thing. Up here in the upper right, I can click on view site. That takes me out as if I wanted to build or watch my whole site. I can come into my users and my groups. That's what's in here by default. So if I look at my users, we can say the only user in my system is JL Zeller. If I wanted to add a new one, I go to add user up here, create the username and password. I don't have to do it at the command prompt. Notice from here on out, those passwords have to be at least 8 characters, not a commonly used numeric, blah, 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 blah. All right. If you want to create another one, this functionality of save, add another, save and continue editing, that's all cool stuff that you can build for your backend. All right. So in our overall, we have our authentication and authorization bucket, right? This handles all the Django backend users stuff. We don't have to create a user system like we did in Flask. We just use the Django built-in one. Why? Because it already has the built-in stuff for passwords, usernames, making sure that they're unique, right? We don't have multiple users of the same username. All that stuff's automatically built in Django. So out here, we can enter in the admin site. We see that we need to be able to edit our questions. Is that somebody online? Might have been.
Discord.
Definitely the Discord.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. All right, we're getting down to this last little part here. If you remember, we created 2 models. We had our question and our polls. Well, right now, if we went to our website, we can't enter in anything, right? And if a user was coming to our website, they don't create the questions and polls. We create the questions and polls, right? So we need to have a way of adding those questions in. So we use the admin to do that. If we go out to our admin page, which is in our backend, we have admin.py. We copy and paste this in. So from our models, import question, and then we're going to register that with the admin site. So admin.site.register question. If we save this, notice how our website automatically reloads down here at the bottom. We now go back out to our website here, hit refresh, and now we can edit our questions right on the bat. We click on questions, comes over here, add question, and we can start adding stuff to our database. So now we can add a question. Who is your favorite instructor?
I want to be one for that answer.
And then the date published, obviously by now that would just see time and now. Hit save. And now we have a question. Notice that this text that showed up here is what?
The
Text of our question, right? The reason that's showing up is because we set that string back in our models. If I didn't do that, it would just say question object 1. That's not useful.
yeah. Okay.
Right? Okay, so now that we have that part set up, you can use that. We need to obviously add what else? We got our questions in. What haven't we added?
The user response.
The user response, but our choices, right? They got to have some choice to actually pick. So we could add in our choices into our admin side, and then we can go from there. So to describe that a little better, that's probably what they're gonna have us do right here, is doing views and all that. So we'll come back and edit that. All right, so that's where I'm cutting it off for today. You guys should have it to the point where you can now add questions to your database. All right. Again, you come in here in a pie chart. Now, one last thing before we leave, we'll hit stop at the top. All right. We need to create a get ignore file immediately in here. So new, and let's do a ignore file, and we want a get ignore. Where's my get ignore? GitHub, where are you? GitHub. There it is at the top.
Wait, so this is a new,
Yeah, so you just go over here to your project on the left.
Yeah.
Right click, go to new, go down to ignore file, and at the very top is Git.
okay,
And inside our Git, we want to scroll down in languages and add Python
I don't have it actually.
at the very, very top.
Yeah, there it is. I don't have the more. Is it because we didn't connect it up into a GitHub?
Well, that's what I'm getting ready to do. So if you come down here, you don't have a new and then ignore
I
file.
don't have that section. My last option is data source and path. Doesn't go any further than
Well, that's disappointing.
just got, I guess.
All right, so we can do it this way. Go to VCS, and we're going to enable version control integration. Okay. This is wanting to know what you want to integrate it with. We want Git. We hit OK. And now it's integrated within all of our stuff here, right?
Mhm.
So we need to make sure we add that. So if we go to our Git and then we do a commit, and in our commit message, we say initial setup, which obviously we did way more than that, but it's fine. Initial setup over here on the unversioned files. We want to make sure not to do idea, and under tutorial, we want the whole thing. Extend polls, we want the whole thing. We do not want our SQLite database, but we do want manage.py. Okay. Come down to commit, do commit and push.
I think something's screwed. It's not letting me add it.
And then on the push, it needs to know where we're going for our remote. So we define remote URL, and this is where we need to set our URL out here, AKA go out to GitHub. Blah, 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 blah. Come on, come on, come on.
Yeah, mine's not letting me add anything on mine. It was all yellow and angry.
Okay, we'll take a look here in a second.
It may be something that's screwy.
So here, when you guys get your new one, we want to go to my main dashboard. So this would be SWAC Prof Zeller, right? No, not Prof Feller. It's close though. There we go. So we grab that guy as our link. Come back into our PyCharm, dump it in here, hit OK. Oh, that was not the repository. We need to create one, right? So very similar process that we've done before. New, create a repository. We would have our same name. So it was what? Django project J Zeller. Okay. Public. You could add the get ignored. Don't add this stuff at this point in time because we'll add it in later. This get ignored template and all that. Actually, you could just add it now so you have it. Right. So go to Python. There we go. Python. That did not save. Let's try that again. All right. Add your README so you have it set automatically. Create repository. Take this URL, and that is what you will dump into here. Like that. Hit OK. There you go. Now you can see that we're shoving all these files up accordingly. And when we push, we will push. It may ask for your credentials or it may automatically do it for you. It looks like it's pushing for me. And it says IDE project settings can be added to Git. We do not want to do that. So click on Don't Ask Again. And it's all been pushed up. So the last thing we have here is the SQLite database. It should be red, meaning that we did not push it. However, we should have a get ignore file here. So if we get an update project and hit OK, merge our incoming, and it's going to go fetch what was already out there. That gene updating. We have it. So now everything should match what's out on the website. Refresh this. Okay, so the reason that we have a compare and pull request is because it doesn't match what was already on our head, aka the ones that had get ignore and readme. So we compare and pull request. It's just going to say, hey, here's all the new files. Do you like it? At the very top, we can merge that. Where's the merge? Oh, just click merge. Go back. I think this really messed this up, how I did this. Why does it not let me merge? Refresh. There'll be a giant button that lets you just do it.
Visual, so easy.
Really should. It's not here. There we go. Pull request. Okay, well, we obviously didn't do this near the right way. Projects. This is a horrible way to end the video. That went really the wrong direction here.
Oh, no.
Why did it not actually merge the request?
Oh, I think it's rough. I got my post.
Did yours per your?
No, I got my post enough. It just said. They gave me some other error.
It's there, but it's not committing my changes. Why is it not committing my
Change and
changes?
master and time. Yeah.
Huh. Okay, well,
That happened.
that happened. There should be an option right here that tells you. Oh, here we go. Default branch, active branch. Give me a section here. Your branches. Okay, so new pull request here. This is our pull request. This needs to merge all the changes. This is,
UI designers.
well, my problem is I clicked on the wrong one. We had a main branch and a master branch, and we actually need to merge those two together. That was the problem.
But you don't want a UI? Huh?
What?
So you don't want a UI?
No UI.
See, if I click on my master branch, that's all of this stuff. So one commit ahead, one commit behind, contribute. Just merge the two branches together. The problem is PyCharm called it master and GitHub called it main. They, if you know the history behind Git, they are GitHub, they don't like the term master. So they changed it to main, which then
Oh,
didn't fix any of the applications that use the old terminology of master and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, they found it to be not PG or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, it broke a lot of stuff when they did that. I had this conversation with some other ones that it was very pain. Okay, we need to merge two requests. How do I do that? Go back to manage. I've done this before a billion times.
That looks like a promising one, actually. That option right there, delete master.
That deletes all my stuff. Do pull request. The problem is there's usually a really big button here that says, yeah, merge. Why is it not showing me that? Somebody's going to get to this recording and be like, "Arr." Fast forward. Huh.
He even has a bigger boost, because I have to download the app again.
ChatGPT has a mobile application. Yeah, for your phone. They're advanced.
Okay, well, we could fix this way. If we go here and we change this master.
Just rename it, I guess.
Well, we should be able to merge. So if we go here and we click on merge and we merge master into origin main and then hit merge. Merge failed, refused. Oh, great.
Right.
That actually should be the way that you do. I don't know why these guys are so mad at each other.
Okay, Chat GPT is giving the answer.
Get it does not, that's why my merge button isn't showing up as it says no. So let's delete this master.
Let's go. There we go.
All right, so we killed the master branch. We go out here. We change this from our master. This is probably gonna mess things up. Remote main. We want to check out and rebase onto master. Rebase, you were trying to rebase some commits already pushed to the protected branch, rebasing them would duplicate the comments. Yeah, it's better than wiping it. It's fine. Woohoo! There we go. Now we got our ignite. It's all merged. It's all merged into the right thing. Our get ignore file is there as we would expect. And notice that our SQLite 3 is now ignored like it should be. What's the other thing we should get it to ignore? Yep, database is ignored. We're good. And our virtual environment's ignored. That's the other thing. And for now, our settings with our secret key, that's fine. Leave it in because we're not modifying that. All right. So we have this in here. We go to get commit.
Oh.
It actually might be right. Let me come out here to code and refresh.
Oh.
Main, QL branches. Why is it not pushing it? I rebased it in. Okay, so we're just going to do one get commit.
A separate video is required.
Yeah.
Yeah. Had to pull
When
that
I'm
out.
taking a week off, it's gonna be the week trying to figure out how to.
Can we
merge
solve? Can we solve this problem?
Okay, so here's how I fixed this in the past. It's not cool, but it works. You go up here, you create a new file and say dummy. And you just create a dummy file in here and add it. Right? And then you get commit and push it. And push. And merge. It really does not like my merge. Okay, so it turns out it's really angry in the way we created this. Yeah, you should not be doing all of my idea files. I don't want those. All right, guys, recording just is going to end. You're leaving everybody hanging. We'll fix it on Thursday.